Hello, friends. In this lesson, we're going to look at the past progressive verb tense in English. We call this verb tense the past progressive because it's talking about the past, and the way we're thinking about the action or looking at it is that it's progressing or continuing in the past. So some books and websites will call this the past progressive, and some books and websites will call this the past continuous. But the idea is the same, that there's some kind of an action or some kind of a state or condition that is continuing at some time in the past, but it's not continuing now. So what does this look like? With the past progressive, we use the helping verb was or were, depending on the subject. So I was, you were, he, she, or it was, we were, and they were. And then the main verb is going to be the ing form of the verb, which we call the present participle. You don't have to know that part. It's just the ing form of the verb, and it will come after the helping verb was or were. So in a sentence, it would look like this. For example, I was drinking a coffee. So here we can see we've got the helping verb was because the subject is I, so I was. And our main verb is drinking, so we've got the ing form of the verb. So I was drinking a coffee. This means it was something that I was doing in the past. It was continuing in the past. As a question form, we would say, were you drinking a coffee? So we can see we've changed the helping verb to were because the subject is you. But the main verb stays the same. So it doesn't matter who or what the subject is. The main verb is just going to stay as the ing form of the verb. And again, when we're making a question, all we do is we take the helping verb and we move it to before the subject. So were you drinking a coffee? If we want to make it into a negative verb, we just add not in between the helping verb and the main verb. So we add not right there. So I was not drinking a coffee. And this is the basic form if we're making it negative. But most of the time, if we're making it negative, we will make it into a contraction. So you could say I wasn't drinking a coffee or you weren't drinking a coffee. And again, this is most commonly what we'll do when we're speaking because it's faster. So as a quick review for the spelling for the ing verbs, it's not always just adding ing to the verb. There are a few rules we have to remember. So first of all, if the verb ends in an E, then we will remove the E and add ing to the word. So like becomes liking with no E. Love becomes loving, no E. Drive becomes driving, no E. And close becomes closing with no E. The second rule here is if the word ends in an IE at the end, then we'll actually change the IE to a Y. So for example, the verb lie becomes lying with a Y, die becomes dying with a Y, and tie becomes tying with a Y. And probably the reason we do this is because if we add ing to this, it's just too many vowels in a row. So it would make the pronunciation confusing. The next rule here is to double the last consonant in the word if the last syllable of the word ends in consonant, vowel, consonant. So for example, the word plan, we can see we have consonant, vowel, consonant, which means we're going to double the final consonant when we add the ing. So plan becomes planning. Stop, consonant, vowel, consonant, becomes stopping with two P's. Win becomes winning with two N's. Forget becomes forgetting with two T's. Now, basically the reason we're doing this is because, remember, if a word ends in E, then we take off of the E and add ing. So if we look at a word like plan, and if we tried to spell it as P-L-A-N-I-N-G like this, without doubling that last consonant, then a native speaker would look at this and pronounce it as planing. planing with a long A. If we did only one P, then we would pronounce it as stoping. If we did just one N, like this, then we would pronounce it as whining, because we would assume that it came from this word here, whine, and we were just assuming we took off the E and added ing. So this is why we need to double that last consonant so that the reader knows that we're not just removing an E here at the end of the word. And for all other verbs, we just add ing. So that was just a kind of a short review of the ing spellings. Now let's get back to the past progressive. So how and why do we use the past progressive? Basically, we use the past progressive to talk about something that was already happening at a specific time in the past, or when another thing happened. For example, I was driving to work around 8 a.m. If I look at this sentence, my verb is was driving, which is past progressive. So I see my helping verb here, was, and I see my main verb, driving. Now, if I look over here, I see that there's another time happening. There's a specific time, and that's 8 a.m. So in this sentence, I'm saying that this long action was happening at this time of the day, or around that time of the day. So usually we can think of the past progressive as a long action that's happening in the past when we're comparing it to another time or another action in the past. So let's look at another example here. While I was driving to work, I spilled my coffee. If we look at this sentence, we have two verbs. We've got was driving, which is past progressive, and we've got spilled, which is past simple. So if I'm thinking about what happened here, while I was driving to work, I spilled my coffee. Spilling my coffee is a short action. It happens very quickly. Now, if I want to tell somebody what else was happening when I spilled my coffee, I can say I was driving. So what was I doing when I spilled my coffee? I was driving. So the driving is the long action, and the spilled, is the short action. So we're saying that this short action happened while the long action was happening in the background. So we can think of this as a long action or as a background action. Now, when we do this, normally the long action is going to be in the past progressive, and the short action is going to be in the past simple. Let's look at another example. We can use the past progressive to talk about two things that were happening at the same time in the past. So not only do we use it to talk about what was happening at a specific time or when another thing happened, short action, but we can also use it to talk about two things that were happening at the same time. So two long actions. For example, I was texting my friend while I was drinking my coffee. So was texting and was drinking. So how long did these things happen for? They might have been happening for 5 or 10 minutes, right? They're not short actions though. They're long actions, and they are two long actions that are happening at the same time. So I was texting and drinking my coffee at the same time, which is probably why I spilled it, because if I'm drinking coffee with one hand and texting with the other, then how am I driving my car? So we can use the past progressive to talk about two long actions that were happening at the same time in the past. Now, when we're using the past progressive, we often use it with these two words, while or when. So for example, while I was driving to work, I spilled my coffee. Or, I was driving to work when I spilled my coffee. If you look at these two sentences, both sentences are basically the same. The only difference between them is we're using while with the past progressive, was driving, and we're using when with the past simple, spilled. So we will use while with the past progressive, and we'll use when with the past simple. That's the only difference between these two sentences. We're using while in this one because we're talking about driving, past progressive, and we're using when here because we're talking about spilled, which is past simple. So while usually goes with the past progressive verb, and when goes with the past simple verb. We don't use them both at the same time. We either use this one or we use this one. We don't use both of them in the same sentence. For another example, while I was wiping up the coffee, I got into an accident. Or I was wiping up the coffee when I got into an accident. Again, the only difference between these two sentences is the first one uses while with the past progressive, and the second one uses when with the past simple. But the meaning of both sentences is basically the same. There's no difference in meaning. There's just a little bit of a difference in focus, like what action are we focusing on. So we can see while and when. So while I was wiping up the coffee, I got into an accident. I was wiping up the coffee when I got into an accident. So while with past progressive, when with past simple. Another thing that we can do with the past progressive, especially when we have two actions happening at the same time, is we can change the order of the clauses. So because we have two subjects and two verbs here, I was wiping and I got into an accident. I've got two verbs and I've got two subjects here. So the subject I and the subject I. That means I have two clauses. I have clause 1 and I have clause 2. Now I can actually change the order of these clauses and the sentence stays the same with the meaning. So I can say I got into an accident while I was wiping up the coffee. So if we take the first sentence, we can divide it there. If we look at the second sentence, we can divide it right there. Now in the second sentence, we can see the word while is right there. Whereas in the first sentence, it's at the beginning of the sentence. So what's the difference between these two sentences? So if we look at the first sentence, while I was wiping up the coffee, we said that this is clause 1, right? Now if we look at the second sentence, we see that all we did was we moved clause 1 to the second half of the sentence. So we'll still call this clause 1. And then we took the second clause, I got into an accident, and we moved it to the beginning of this sentence here. So we'll call that clause 2 still. So all we did was we switched the order of the clauses. Now I said the meaning stays the same. The meaning hasn't changed at all. All I did was I switched which clause came first and which clause came second. Now, if I start the sentence with either when or while, then I need to put a comma at the end of that clause. If we look at the second sentence, I got into an accident while I was wiping up the coffee. You see while is in the middle of the sentence. There's no comma in this sentence. I don't need it because this word here, while, is kind of acting like the comma. Or we can change, instead of using while, we can use when. So I was wiping up the coffee when I got into an accident. Again, we'll say we can divide the sentence here. When I got into an accident, I was wiping up the coffee. We can divide the sentence there. All we did was we switched the order of the clauses. So the sentences are basically the exact same, except we're putting the clauses in the opposite order. So I was wiping up the coffee when I got into an accident. We just took this part here, when I got into an accident, and we moved it over here. When I got into an accident, I was wiping up the coffee. But again, the meaning of both sentences is the same. You can choose which way you want to do it. But again, if I start the sentence with when or while, I'm going to put a comma at the end of that clause there. All right, so this is just a short introduction to the past progressive verb tense. I hope it was helpful for you. Thanks for watching.